I'm constantly experimenting with mediums, and I believe that the choice of medium and the effect it produces is just as much an expressive decision as the color or the marks that I make. And there are a number of naturally occurring oils, like linseed oil, which is made of dried flaxseed, or poppy oil, walnut oil, even clove oil, all things that slow down or retard the drying time, allowing me to work the paint over multiple sessions. Sometimes at night I'll lay the painting flat on the floor and put a sheet of plastic over it to even further slow down that drying time. De Kooning would lay newspaper sheets on top of his wet paintings, and then when pulling the paper off, there would be the print of the newspaper right in the wet paint, creating kind of a secondary image which he would further work into his compositions. And then in terms of secatives, or things that speed up the drying time, I've used Japan dryer, which I don't really like anymore. I've been using a Gamblin product for many years called Galkyd, which is a synthetic alkyd resin, which kind of flattens out the brush marks, creating kind of a hard enamel-like surface, which dries both shiny and rather quickly. And what I'll do is mix about half Galkyd to half pigment, apply that onto the painting and allow it to dry for a couple of hours till it becomes sticky. Then I'll work it from there. And what it does is gives me a kind of resistance or skidding effect that I really can't get any other way. Some of the magenta and purple lattice work in the middle of this painting was created using that method. So I'm interested in the fact that time is a factor in the decisions we make as painters. We both slow things down and speed them up according to the types of marks that we want to make. So that in the end, the painting is really just the summation of many such decisions along the way. As I get older, there are certain things that I can't endure anymore. One of them is running. I'm big, and when I start running, I can't stop. So if you ever want to get rid of me, just tell me to go for a run. The other thing I find that I can't endure anymore is winter. And I've lived in New York City for 26 years. This was by far the most intense winter. I can't stand being cold and wet and having to carry things. And sometimes when I'm painting and something is not working, rather than remove it, I'll double down. I'll put twice as much in. So, for instance, this painting behind me, I was putting in a little bit of green. It was discordant in a bad way. It wasn't working. So instead of diminishing that, I put a lot more into it. And actually the painting is working now. So sometimes a lot more of something is the answer rather than taking it out. For this winter break a couple of weeks ago, for our kids, instead of going somewhere warm, we decided to follow that same logic and double down. We decided to drive north. We rented a big house with an indoor pool up in the Adirondacks in ski country with some friends of ours, and we set out driving north. And our car is a two-wheel drive Nissan designed for outlet shopping. It's not designed for icy interstates. So we set out, and around Albany, the ice and the snow was so bad, we were slipping and sliding, that we just pulled off the road and checked into a roadside hotel, and where we slept and just watched TV and read and just played together. And that night we walked across the parking lot to a Sports Grilly, with an E on the end, as my kids say, and we sat down and had watery iceberg lettuce and buffalo wings, and we laughed and we had so much fun. And I think that was the highlight of the trip, just being together, and just the notion that whatever gets thrown at you, if you just simply own it, it's okay. And I apply that to painting. If every mistake is made by my hands, I own it, so it's okay. Every good thing that happens is made by my hands, and that's okay as well. There's that great John Lennon quote, "Life is what happens when you're busy making plans." We just sat there and we were just in that moment, owning it, and we had the best time. And then the next morning, the snow had abated and we headed further north, and we actually got to the house and we had a great time. We don't ski, but we did snowshoeing and sledding and hot chocolate. And we had a blast. So the lesson for me was sometimes when something is distressing or doesn't work, double it. And the other lesson is for me, Turks and Caicos next winter. About 20 years ago, when my grandmother passed away, we were going in a funeral procession to the cemetery. Our family and close friends in a big black stretch limousine, going down a typical South Carolina country back road. No one was saying a word in the car. I was sitting by the window watching farm after farm pass by. And I remember seeing a man get down off of his tractor in his overalls, remove his hat, and stand there with the hat over his heart as our funeral procession passed slowly by. And that image has stayed with me for a long time. I know I'm given to maudlin statements from time to time, but that's the kind of man I want to be. That's the kind of painter I want to be. I want to give myself to this thing outside of myself. The notion that this gentleman gave a few minutes of his time on this earth to something outside of himself, out of respect. He had no idea who we were, and we didn't know who he was. I want to relinquish my time on this earth to this third thing. I'm struggling a lot in a big painting right now, and this happens all the time, and I just keep plowing through. I destroy the image and then start again, and then scrape it off, wipe it down with t-shirts and paper towels, and then start over again. I always think flatline is more interesting than life support. I think it's important to start completely over again. And the reason I do this is because I want the painting to feel like it's endured 1,000 hours of being stared at by me in my battered chair in my studio, so that by the time it reaches the viewer in a gallery, it already feels like it's worn in and already been stared at. It's already eyeballs have already looked at it. It's already worn in. I've always believed that there's a whole other world that runs side by side with this world, that's out of sight, that's invisible, that runs concurrent with our world. And that every now and then, if we're lucky, we're able to tap into that world. And I think one of the reasons we paint is to crack into that heat and keep it around a little bit longer. So as I work, I don't think about trying to be new. There's way too much emphasis placed on novelty in the art world. I don't even care about being good. I care about enduring. I care that the work continues. The root of the word passion comes from the Latin pati, which means to suffer. What am I willing to suffer for? What am I willing to give of myself? And I don't mean suffer in that I tear up hotel rooms and brood in my studio. And I am, of course, aware that there is true suffering in this world. I would never have the temerity to claim that I know anything about that. But what I mean is, am I willing to allow this thief to come into my studio every day and steal my time on this earth? I happen to believe that a painting is a living, breathing thing. And like any living thing, it has to be fed. How much am I willing to feed it? I think a lot about position in my paintings. Not my philosophical or political position, but in what position will my viewer experience the image? How will the footprint of the viewer affect their ability to perceive the imagined space that I am creating through these layers of color? I am a landscape painter. I create fixed static vantage points. They don't change. So I have to be aware of and consider the position of the viewer, both physically, their skin to the skin of the paint, and also conceptually. How will they relate? How will they extend themselves into this imagined space? I'm reading a book right now by Svetlana Alpers called The Art of Describing, 17th century Dutch painting. And in that she discusses Jan van Eyck and his ability to be both a telescope and a microscope. In that the area in the foreground is full of sensual details, the threads, the ornate tile work on the floor, even the hairs in the faces. And then if you jump through the arches to the landscape beyond, you have a fully formed landscape, redolent with light and atmosphere, so that no matter what your position is, both conceptually and physically, you have a fully integrated unit. That Van Eyck sets up a supply chain of information that allows the painting to work from any standpoint, no matter where you stand your body and no matter where you project yourself into the illusion. I've always thought of Joseph Stella as being the same, a master at using micro and macro. From about age 13 to 21 or 22, I worked in kitchens in restaurants in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina every summer. And when I was 13, it was illegal to work. I was bussing tables, and if anyone ever asked me, a customer, how old I was, I would lie and say that I was the manager's son. So I could keep working. And later on, one of my jobs was washing pots and pans. And I love manual, repetitive, arduous labor. I love when you do one thing and you get another. It's so different from what I do now in my studio. I sit in my chair all day, and then I get up and make these very small adjustments that may not result in anything until 8 months later. I plant seeds in July that may not be harvested until the following February. It's very slow, very ambiguous work. So I do appreciate things that are black and white and very effort result oriented. I love our dishwasher for the same reason. I put dirty dishes in, I push a button, I take clean dishes out. It's very, very direct and simple. One of my other jobs was taking the garbage out from the kitchen to the dumpster at the end of each evening service. And it was in a restaurant called Slug's Rib. And at the end of the night, I would push this heavy plastic trash can across a gravel parking lot full of ribeye and prime rib carcasses and salad and rice. And I would push it a couple of feet and then stop, and then push it a couple of more feet and then stop. And every time I'd stop, I would think, here I am. The world is revolving around me. Things are happening all the time simultaneously, but here I am. A position reaffirmed by this dense, heavy trash can. And for me, that's become an apt analogy for the process of making a painting, like pushing a trash can across a parking lot. I make a few moves, here I am. I adjust something, take something off, and then here I am again. So then in the end, the final painting, the final summation, is a marking or an affirmation of one position. Here I am. So I still tend to believe that for me, painting is akin to pushing a can across a parking lot. It certainly makes it a hell of a lot less precious.